Today we're talking about forms and foundations. And it's often been said that if you want to build a great structure, you have to invest in a good foundation. And part of that is you need to build in a place that's conducive to quality building. It doesn't matter how great your foundation is if you're building on sand and you never actually get down to a solid bedrock. So sometimes it's important to just be willing to walk away from the things that are truly not ever going to be conducive to growth and upward mobility in your life. That being said, though, let's just say that we're talking about how to build a foundation, how to create a foundation, and what you have to think about as you proceed to do so. We tend to think about life as a thing where we proceed to build, and then the structure starts to take shape, and then eventually, through a lot of small additions, the finished product comes into form. But what we lose sight of is the fact that a good building, any building, with a foundation will usually begin with a form before there even is a foundation. It's that wooden infrastructure that gets built so that you can pour concrete into it. It's the scaffolding that gets put up so that you can get to the places you need to go to build the actual building. And in our lives, there's a lot of experiences which we will have, and then we'll move on from those experiences. And they're like the forms that you put in before you pour the concrete. They aren't meant to stay. They aren't meant to be part of the finished building. And yet, they're also necessary, because without a form, you can't pour that concrete. You can't create the atmosphere for growth if you don't invest in those initial things that set the stage and help you to be ready for the next step, even though they will not ultimately remain part of the finished work. And we tend to want to feel like everything has to be a permanent part of our life. The thought of something being part of our life and then moving on from it feels like a loss. It feels like we're giving up something and we're taking steps backwards. But imagine if you're pouring a sidewalk. You put that plywood or whatever it is around the edges so that you get that nice crisp edge to the concrete pour. Imagine if after you finished, you leave the wood there because you don't want to take away anything. Well, that's not the point. The point is to create the form so that you can use that as a segue into a finished state. And then when you reach that finished state, then the scaffolding and the support goes away. And you move on without some of those things. And the fact that they aren't there anymore doesn't negate them. It doesn't make them less important, because they were necessary at that time so that you could begin and ultimately progress to the next part of your journey. I think about games I used to play, and then I don't play them anymore. I fell in love with adventure games playing King's Quest back in the late 90s. And as amazing as that experience was, that was a memory from early gaming, which does not represent my personal gaming experience today. That was a formative experience that set the stage for a lifelong love of gaming, and more broadly, a love of fantasy, a love of imagination, a love of seeing things as more than just the sum of their parts, a love of history, a love of literature. And in many ways, gaming itself has been for me a form that was used for the purpose of other things which I never would have experienced the way I did without it. You see, there's a lot of things in our lives that add diversity and add potential and give us opportunities to be in specific places at specific junctures and times in our life. And absolutely none of those experiences are worthless. None of those experiences can be written off as that mistake I made, that thing I never should have done. Because we wouldn't be the people we are today if it weren't for the entire spectrum of all the things we've experienced in our life. So don't ever look at your life and think that you've made too many mistakes, or that your life is too imperfect, or that you wish you would have just learned that lesson sooner. It's so easy to do that. I know I've done it. I think back 10 years ago and I imagine all the things I might do differently if I could just rewind the clock and have it to do over again. But then I think about how there's things I'm trying to do in my life today, and I wouldn't be trying to do those things. I wouldn't have the perspective that I have today if it weren't for the journey, the path that I followed that brought me here. And as much as we would like to learn our lessons immediately, as much as we would like to have that instantaneous return on investment, pouring a good foundation for your life is kind of like setting concrete. It isn't instantaneous. It has to have the form. It has to have those intermediate stages. You can't have instant set concrete that is solid the whole time, because the entire point of concrete is that it begins in a liquid form. You can't skip the growth process. You can't skip the formative process. You have to embrace it. And I often think about construction sites that I've seen, and it amazes me how, for so long, if you're just a passerby, you look at these things and it just doesn't really even seem like there's any real building happening. There's just a lot of moving of dirt back and forth, diggers going here and there. The mounds of dirt move around, but it just doesn't seem like anything's being built, because there's so much moving around and setting the stage and digging things up and burying them again. The groundwork is not glamorous. And yet, the greatest buildings ever built always start off with a majority of their growth happening beneath the surface. Don't ever criticize your journey. Don't ever judge other people's journey either. Because the truth is, no matter how much you might think that you're enlightened in some way, no matter how much you think that you have a perspective that other people should learn from, the truth is, everyone needs to learn at their own pace, in their own way. And no one should ever be robbed of that. No one should ever be empowered to skip that process. It's like the caterpillar trapped inside the cocoon. As it grows stronger, eventually it breaks free, and it's a butterfly. But it has to go through that process of struggle so that it can eventually emerge and experience the glorious end result. But it will never endure if someone else, some external force, pries it free. It has to learn for itself. I think about all of the mistakes that I've made when I was younger. I think about all the mistakes I see other people making. And I think about how even if I could travel back in time and give my own self advice, I know I wouldn't follow it. Because I had to learn my lessons by experiencing life. That's how we learn. By making mistakes. By learning from the consequences of those. And then, as we grow, the process starts to set. That concrete starts to slowly transition from its liquid form into its finished form. Old things pass away. And then, after a while, well, nobody looks at a finished building and admires the old wooden forms that were used to pour the concrete to make the foundation. Nobody even thinks about those things anymore. But the truth is, the building would not be there without them. In all things, always give thanks for the life you have. Be glad for the blessings. Be glad for the lessons. Be glad for the opportunities for correction. Be glad for the opportunity to learn, to make yourself better. And yes, even be glad for the things in your life which you have moved on from, because you needed those as well. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thank you.